Buying a mattress today feels less like shopping and more like applying for a mortgage on a rectangle. Memory foam, cooling gel, orthopedic zones, a 100-night trial, and somehow a pillow that costs more than a goat. But for nearly all of human history, nobody had a bed showroom, no springs. No fitted sheets, no tiny tag threatening legal consequences if removed. So how did ancient humans sleep without waking up as a frozen, insect-covered appetizer? The obvious answer is on the ground, but that is a little like saying humans crossed oceans in wood. Technically true, impressively unhelpful. Our ancestors did not simply collapse wherever gravity placed them. They chose locations, built sleeping surfaces, controlled fire, used plants, shared protection, and slowly turned one of the most dangerous moments in daily life into something almost comfortable. Almost. Because before humans could invent the bed, they first had to solve a more urgent problem: how to sleep deeply without being eaten. Before beds could exist, our ancestors had to solve a much older sleeping problem. Where do you put an unconscious primate? For millions of years, the safest answer was probably up. Many living apes build sleeping platforms in trees, bending branches into surprisingly sturdy nests. These are not random piles of leaves. Chimpanzees often choose flexible branches, arrange them into a bowl, and add leafy material on top. It is basically custom furniture. Except the delivery crew is also the customer, and occasionally throws fruit at strangers. Tree sleeping made sense for smaller primates. Elevation reduced contact with some ground predators, biting insects, damp soil, and the sort of nighttime surprise that begins with glowing eyes. But as our lineage became larger, more terrestrial, and better adapted for walking on two legs, sleeping high above the ground became less convenient. A heavy-bodied hominin balancing on branches is not majestic. It is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Ground sleeping, however, created a brutal trade. The ground was easier to reach, easier to gather around, and much better for social groups. It was also where the lions lived. To make terrestrial sleep possible, early humans needed more than courage. They needed technology, cooperation, and a talent modern people still use every night, turning a dangerous environment into a controlled little bubble. Fire was probably one of the biggest changes. A maintained fire offered warmth, light, smoke, and at least some protection from animals that preferred their food less illuminated. It also extended social time after sunset. Around a fire, a group could eat, repair tools, care for children, communicate, and decide who had heard that suspicious rustling noise. Shelter choice mattered too. A rock overhang could block wind and rain, while an elevated patch of dry ground prevented a sleeper from becoming part of the local drainage system. Even without walls, location was architecture. Then there was group size. Sleeping near others meant more ears, more noses, and more chances that somebody would wake up before the leopard completed its evening plans. Human groups also contained different sleep patterns. Some people naturally stay awake later, while others rise earlier. In a small camp, that variation may have created overlapping periods of vigilance, leaving fewer moments when absolutely everyone was deeply asleep. This does not mean prehistoric camps had an official night shift with a clipboard. It means ordinary biological differences may have become useful. And once fire, cooperation, and safer campsites made ground sleeping possible, our ancestors could focus on comfort. They selected dry locations. They avoided exposed wind. They gathered soft plants. They may have used hides and built repeated sleeping areas. The first bed was not a piece of furniture. It was a strategy. The earliest beds were probably discovered the same way humans discovered most useful things. Somebody got tired of being uncomfortable and started moving plants around. Picture the problem. The ground steals heat, collects moisture, attracts insects, and contains rocks placed with suspicious accuracy beneath the human spine. Even without knowing anything about thermodynamics, early humans would have noticed that a thick layer of dry grass felt warmer than bare soil. Leaves added softness. Reeds created airflow. Animal hides could block wind and reduce contact with the cold surface below. Nobody needed to invent comfort from nothing. They only had to observe it. Other animals already made nests. Birds built them. Rodents lined burrows. Great apes arranged branches and leaves into sleeping platforms. Our ancestors came from a long evolutionary tradition of manipulating vegetation before bedtime. Once some hominins began sleeping more regularly on the ground, the behavior could travel with them. The tree nest simply became a floor nest. But ground bedding had one major flaw. It became disgusting. A pile of grass used night after night would collect sweat, food fragments, shed skin, insects, and whatever the toddler had been holding 5 minutes earlier. Fleas and other pests would not view this as a hygiene problem. They would view it as urban development. That may explain why early sleeping surfaces were probably temporary, regularly replaced, or burned. Fresh plant material could be gathered nearby, while old bedding could be swept aside or set on fire. Burning would remove waste, destroy some parasites, and leave behind ash, which is less welcoming to crawling insects than damp organic material. Smoke may have helped too. A smoky shelter is unpleasant when you are trying to breathe, but it is also unpleasant when you are a mosquito. Early humans did not need to understand insect chemistry. They only needed to notice that certain plants smelled strong when crushed or burned, and that sleeping near them resulted in slightly less midnight scratching. This is where bedding begins to look less like a lucky accident and more like accumulated knowledge. One person notices that dry sedges are softer. Another learns that green branches smoke too much. Someone else discovers that a particular aromatic leaf discourages insects. These small observations are remembered, copied, and taught. Over generations, a sleeping place becomes a constructed environment. Dry ground beneath, plant layers above, fire nearby, companions around the edges, and perhaps a hide pulled over the body when temperatures drop. It still would not resemble a modern bedroom. There was no privacy, no silence, and almost certainly no rule against eating where you slept. But the principle was already familiar. Before lying down, humans prepared the world beneath them. Grass does not usually survive for 200,000 years. It decomposes, burns, gets trampled into dust, or is eaten by an animal with absolutely no respect for future archaeologists. That is what makes border caves so remarkable. Located in the Lubombo Mountains on the border of South Africa and Eswatini, the cave preserves microscopic traces of grass bedding dating back at least 200,000 years. Researchers found plant remains concentrated toward the rear of the shelter, where people appear to have created comfortable surfaces for sleeping, resting, and working. This was not just grass tossed onto dirt. Much of it rested on layers of ash. Ash may have formed naturally from previous fires, but the repeated association suggests that people sometimes deliberately placed bedding over it. The reason was probably practical. Fine ash can obstruct the breathing systems of ticks and other crawling arthropods, absorb moisture, and make it harder for pests to move around. In other words, the oldest known mattress may also have come with built-in bug control. Researchers also found tiny fragments of camphor bushwood among the bedding remains. Plants in this group produce aromatic compounds that can repel insects, although archaeologists cannot prove exactly why those branches reached the sleeping area. They may have been fuel, accidental debris, or a deliberate prehistoric version of mosquito spray. The honest answer is that the bugs are unavailable for comment. Border Cave also contained burned grass and charred material, suggesting that old surfaces were periodically destroyed. Burning used bedding would have cleared waste and killed pests before a fresh layer was installed. This was not housekeeping in the modern sense. Nobody was fluffing decorative pillows. But it was repeated management of domestic space, which is a surprisingly sophisticated behavior. Later evidence from Sibudu, another South African rock shelter, makes the pattern even clearer. Around 77,000 years ago, people there constructed bedding from sedges and other broad-leaved grasses. Some layers were topped with leaves from Cryptocarya woodii, a tree whose aromatic chemicals have insect-killing and insect-repelling properties. By roughly 58,000 years ago, bedding at Sibudu was being burned regularly, perhaps as part of routine camp maintenance. Archaeologists found multiple compacted layers of plant material, ash, and occupation debris, showing that the shelter floor was repeatedly prepared and renewed. These sites do not give us a complete prehistoric bedroom. Organic materials rarely survive, so hides, wooden frames, blankets, and pillows may have existed without leaving clear evidence. But the grass remains are enough to overturn the image of ancient humans simply passing out on bare stone. 200,000 years ago, people were already choosing sleeping zones, laying down vegetation, using ash, managing insects, and cleaning old surfaces with fire. They did not sleep without beds. They slept without furniture stores. Archaeology is excellent at telling us that people placed grass on cave floors. It is much less capable of telling us whether someone woke at 2 in the morning, stared into the fire, and regretted something they said during a mammoth hunt. That is where evidence ends and hypotheses begin. One popular idea is that ancient humans slept in 2 separate phases, waking for a quiet interval in the middle of the night. Historical records from much later societies describe a first sleep and a second sleep, with people using the gap to pray, talk, work, visit neighbors, or apparently make nighttime far more productive than it has any right to be. But those records do not prove that all prehistoric humans slept that way. Sleep patterns are shaped by latitude, season, temperature, artificial light, daily labor, danger, and culture. A winter camp in Ice Age Europe may have followed a very different rhythm from a tropical foraging group near the equator. Modern studies of non-industrial communities also complicate the picture. People living without electric lighting do not necessarily fall asleep the moment the sun disappears. They may remain awake around fires, socialize, and sleep several hours later. Their sleep is often flexible rather than divided neatly into one supposedly natural pattern. Then there is the question of vigilance. Because predators, rival groups, fires, crying infants, and collapsing weather systems did not respect bedtime. Researchers have proposed that ancient camps benefited from people sleeping at slightly different times. Studies of present-day hunter-gatherers suggest that natural differences in age and chronotype can produce near-continuous nighttime activity within a group. This is plausible. It is not a fossilized security schedule. We also cannot confidently reconstruct prehistoric sleeping positions. Humans may have curled tightly for warmth, slept beside fires, leaned against cave walls, shared hides, or rested with children and companions pressed close together. Some environments may have encouraged hammocks or raised platforms, while others favored grass beds on sheltered ground. Even Neanderthal bedrooms should be treated cautiously. Caves contain hearths, tools, animal bones, and activity zones, but assigning modern room labels can make ancient spaces seem tidier than they were. A sleeping area might become a butchering area the next day, and a place for tool repair after dinner. Prehistoric life did not come with floor plans. The safest conclusion is not that our ancestors had one perfect natural method of sleep. They adapted. They changed locations, materials, fire use, group arrangements, and sleeping schedules according to local conditions. There was no universal ancestral bedtime. There was only the nightly challenge of becoming unconscious without becoming dead. Once humans made sleeping on the ground safer, sleep stopped being merely a biological shutdown and became a social event. A camp at night was not just a collection of tired bodies. It was an organized system of warmth, protection, caregiving, and information. People gathered near fire because fire was useful, but also because everyone else was gathered near fire. That is how civilization usually begins, with a practical solution that accidentally becomes a meeting. Sleeping close together reduced heat loss in cold environments and made it easier to protect infants, injured adults, and older group members. A child waking in the dark did not have to search for help. Help was breathing 2 feet away, probably using someone else's arm as a pillow. This closeness also created new responsibilities. Fires needed fuel, children needed calming, strange noises needed interpretation. Someone had to decide whether the movement beyond the light was wind, an animal, or a relative returning from an unnecessarily dramatic bathroom trip. Nighttime may therefore have strengthened cooperation. During daylight, people hunted, gathered, traveled, and worked. After dark, movement became harder, and the group became more concentrated. That created time for conversation, instruction, planning, and storytelling. Stories around fire were not simply entertainment. They could preserve information about dangerous animals, seasonal plants, water sources, social obligations, and past mistakes. A memorable story about someone ignoring tracks near a river is much easier to retain than a formal safety manual titled Reasons Not to Approach the Crocodile. Repeated sleeping sites could also develop meaning. A protected cave, familiar grove, or reliable camp might become associated with particular families, ancestors, rituals, or seasonal gatherings. The same place used for rest could also host healing, mourning, food sharing, and ceremonies. Sleep and ritual naturally overlapped because both required people to enter vulnerable or altered states under the protection of others. As settlements became more permanent, sleeping areas became more structured. Floors were cleaned and resurfaced. Hearths were placed carefully. Walls and roofs improved insulation. Raised platforms separated bodies from damp ground, waste, and crawling pests. Bedding became woven, stuffed, traded, inherited, and eventually decorated far beyond anything required by the human spine. But the most important invention was not the frame or mattress. It was trust. To sleep beside other people is to surrender awareness while assuming they will not harm you, abandon you, or allow something hungry to walk into camp. Every shared sleeping place was a small social contract renewed each night. Long before humans built cities, they practiced civilization in the dark. They kept the fire alive, and each other. Today, most of us sleep inside climate-controlled boxes, on engineered foam, under weighted blankets, beside charging phones that glow like tiny emergency beacons for problems that do not exist. And yet the ancient logic is still there. We still build nests. We arrange pillows, choose sides, adjust temperature, block light, check locks, and place familiar objects within reach. Some people need silence. Others need a fan, rain sounds, a podcast, or the reassuring hum of an appliance apparently preparing for takeoff. These habits look modern, but they follow an old pattern. Control the environment before surrendering control of the body. That is what a bed really is. Not just furniture, but permission to become vulnerable. Our ancestors created that permission with grass, ash, fire, shelter, and other people. We create it with door locks, curtains, thermostats, and an unreasonable number of pillows. The materials changed, the problem did not. Even insomnia carries an echo of that past. The human brain was not designed to switch off like a laptop. It monitors temperature, noise, social tension, hunger, illness, and danger. Sometimes that vigilance is useful. Sometimes it keeps you awake at 3:17 a.m. Replaying a conversation from 8 years ago. Evolution is not always helpful on schedule. The story of ancient sleep also reminds us that comfort did not appear suddenly with civilization. It was built gradually, through observation and shared knowledge. A softer plant, a drier corner. A better fire, a useful leaf that insects avoided. Small discoveries accumulated until the ground itself became a human invention. So ancient humans did not sleep without beds in the way we usually imagine. They slept without bed frames, mattress brands, and 12-month financing. They still prepared sleeping places. They maintained them. They protected one another around them. And across thousands of generations, that nightly ritual became so ordinary that we forgot how extraordinary it is. Every night, you close your eyes and trust the world not to kill you for several hours. That is an astonishing act. And when you sink into memory foam, adjust your cooling gel pillow, and complain that the mattress feels slightly too firm, remember where it started. A pile of grass. With excellent marketing potential.